He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Henry, we're back with another episode, and I've been kind of puzzling through something. We're going to go back and explore a topic we've talked about before, but maybe in a slightly different perspective. And this is taking advantage of a number of people that you and I both follow on LinkedIn who've had ongoing conversations about the state of advertising today and what the nature of what a concept is or an idea. And I use the word concept because as a former creative, that's the word I bandied about with my colleagues, with my partner, with my creative director bosses. And when I became a creative director, that's what I talked about all the time. Let's make sure we do some conceptual thinking here. So I'm not sure we're going to come to a definitive answer, but I want to have this discussion on what is an idea, because I think this is fundamental to all of advertising, and how can a creative brief, which is the core of what we talk about, how can a creative brief foster conceptual thinking? We both know that once the brief has been written and the creative teams have been briefed on the top or on the assignment, all of a sudden you have to put that thing out into the world, and we sort of lose control because marketers, the client can change things. But we have this ability to create this document that sets the path, that lights a spark, that gets people to thinking. How do we hold on to this idea of conceptual, idea-based advertising in light of what can happen once we put the brief out into the world? I know that's a lot to unpack, but I put that out for a way to get into this conversation.
Look, I think it's worth mentioning the genesis of this discussion was a LinkedIn post in which some old Porsche advertising was put up next to some new Porsche advertising. And the idea behind the post was the deterioration of advertising. I think since then we went online and we were looking at some more recent Porsche out-of-home advertising, and some of it is actually interesting. So it's possible that maybe we were giving the new Porsche advertising a bad rap unnecessarily, just based on one clunker that's out there. Clunker, see what I did there? But to get back to the point of what is an idea, I think an idea is a point of view, an organizing point of view or principle for a brand or a product that the advertising can then advance that point of view. And usually a good, and so I think there's 2 things, and we had this debate when we were talking about idea-based versus non-idea-based advertising in the previous episode that we talked about. It is the benefit of having an idea versus not having an idea, and right. Then the benefit of having a good idea versus just having a pedestrian idea. And of course, I think there's a benefit to having an idea, and the better that idea is. And I think that that's why we have this cult around certain advertisers like Apple and Nike, because their idea hasn't changed, right? Their central tenet, embodied often in a tagline, is simple for people to understand and digest, and therefore it's an easy litmus test when you're evaluating the advertising. Does it deliver on just do it? Does it deliver on think different? And if it doesn't, then you know that it's not within the bounds of the brand. But I think there's a lot that gets lost here because we're talking about advertising executions versus what a brand stands for. And I think what we see sometimes is that the brands that we once were hallowed brands, right, where the worshipped brands have lost their way. And that's kind of what jars us as marketers. And I think that's what we're seeing with some of these posts on LinkedIn, which is what's the deal with these once great brands and that they've lost kind of the thread?
I was fascinated by the documentary. I think you recommended it to me, called Project Rebrief, where the folks at Google invited five legends in the advertising world who were responsible for coming up with the creative for some of the best brands: Avis, Volvo, Coke, and one other, Alka-Seltzer. And the project was built around the idea of, can we take these great campaigns and make them relevant for today? And what struck me about the whole documentary, and really what is the impetus for this conversation, is that these oldsters who were my age and older, mid 60s to late 70s, kept reminding the young whippersnappers who were well versed in great technology, it's the idea, it's the idea. We can't lose track of the idea. That's what drove the success of these old campaigns. Coming back to what we're talking about today, yeah, I agree that we don't want to slam Porsche for having a clunker. Every brand has its off moments, but the premise of an idea is central to what we do when we write a creative brief. If there were some way that we could say, if you write a certain creative brief, you'll never lose track, you'll never go off the tracks and risk not having a great idea, it doesn't work that way, sadly. But we still need to preach what we know is the strongest point of a brief, which is that it is a concise, inspirational document built around a single point of view.
And I think no two situations are alike, right? Like, you have brands that are startup brands, right? So you're creating an idea. When you are an agency that wins an account of a legacy brand, part of your job is to work from what exists, right? Like, brand is really a construct in the minds of the target audience. And so you have to recognize what exists there and work with it. And we've talked about this desire to abandon everything that a brand has stood for before, which I think is very wrongheaded. And so I I I think that it falls down ultimately, and spoken like a true agency person, the responsibility is on the client, because they're the ones that are paying for it at the end, right? If the agency produces bad ideas, it's because the client hasn't articulated what the brand is about in a way that everybody understands it, everybody can live it. And some of the greatest campaigns of all time, we talk about the BMWs back in the automotive space, the ultimate driving machine. That was a long running campaign that you could understand how the campaign worked and what it was. I remember many executions. I remember when they had the convertible and they said the ultimate tanning machine, right? And so it was a play off ultimate driving machine. But you could only have that extension because the idea was so well defined in the eyes of the consumer that when they saw ultimate tanning machine, they got it and they said, "Oh, this isn't just a convertible. This is the BMW of convertibles."
Right. Well, I mean, we both agree that everything comes down to the client's leadership. But I'm going to argue on behalf of the agency, because I'm the product of an agency as well. If there's no leadership from the agency, no pushback from the agency, then you can't have some of these iconic campaigns. And I would love to have been in the fly on the wall when there was a head-to-head battle between the CMO at Apple and Lee Clow, talking about 1984. I mean, I don't think that would have been an easy sell. It would have probably been really scary, but they managed to do it. So there had to have been some leadership on the part of the creative side, the agency world, to push through the fear and the doubts and the worries on the part of clients. So that's where our perspective comes in. That's where this is all about the creative brief and briefing, and using that document as the jumping off point. You can't just blame, well, we do blame the client when we think it's relevant, but it also has to be us. I remember I worked for Team One Advertising on the iconic brand of Lexus in the mid 1990s. 10 years, less than 10 years after the launch of the brand. My boss was Tom Cordner, who didn't care much for me because I worked in the direct response department. He used to come into my office and say, how are things in direct marketing? DRECK, right? So he didn't think much about me. That's fine. I learned a lot working for him and in that environment. He's the guy who wrote The Relentless Pursuit of Perfection. And he was an art director, by the way. He wrote that line. Where is it today? They threw that line away. I'm, as an alum at Team One and a fan of Lexus because I worked on the account, I'm wondering what the heck happened. Why did we walk? Why did they? I'm still using first person, and I haven't worked for the agency in 30 years. Why do they walk away from that? I don't understand it. But it's not the first brand where that has happened, and it's not going to be the last brand. Yeah. I wish I could say that the creative brief was a way to rein in that kind of errant thinking. Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. So I think, and we mentioned off air that I think with Lexus, it's a rare case in which the product really transcends the advertising. They make a great product. It's not for me. It's not a brand for me. My dad is a Lexus guy. He loves it. But can't deny that it's a great brand that has a great following. And so I think in their case, it's the advertising isn't doing everything it could for the brand, right? Like it's better if your product is good and your advertising is good. But if you have to pick one, I'd rather have the product be good than the advertising be good if you had to pick one. But the advertising is definitely not doing all that it could for the brand.
Well, remember what Bill Bernbach used to say. So the fastest way to kill a bad product is with good advertising. I'm paraphrasing.
People find out how bad it is faster.
Right. We can incite them. We can persuade them to try it once. But if it's no good, all the best advertising in the world is not going to get them to try it twice, which I think comes back to what is the best way to get someone to do something? I still say that it's an idea. It's a concept. That's the term that I used as a creative. It's a concept. Now, your definition was this point of view. This universal, I would add that it's a universal mental impression that you instantly recognize. There's a universality to it. We've both seen plenty of advertising where the idea is weak. It's abstract, it's vague. It's still arguably an idea. It just doesn't carry through to lift up the brand, to reflect the brand. How can the creative brief protect that? I don't know. I'm kind of groping here. It's like, this is our bailiwick. This is what we love. This is what we teach and talk about. How can this document do more to protect the brands that they're writing for?
I think writing a good brief will help, and then advocating for that brief and advocating for ideas. I think whether you're working on the client side or you're working at an agency, I think it's a wake-up call that we all need to be pushing for bigger and better ideas. I think one of the reasons we've seen a deterioration in ideas is, all this stuff about big data and social media and programmatic media buying, it became all about exposures and number of exposures and micro-targeting. And what got lost in the shuffle was, well, what are we exposing them to?
Right.
And I think that exposing them to something that's motivating, that makes them do something in your parlance, is the important part. And it's all gotten lost to the mechanics of how we reach them. The how we reach them is important, but what we reach them with is more important.
Well, I have a feeling that we're going to be coming back to this topic, Henry. We're not going to, solve it right here and now, but I think it's a great topic to discuss and good stuff.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're any closer to answering it, but I feel better that we talked about it in this therapy session.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Howard. So we're back with another creative review, and today we're going to look at some work from Tiffany and Company, the jewelry retailer and manufacturer and marketer. And we'll put the ads, some of the ads, Instagram work and out of home stuff up as we're talking about it. Um, Noticeably organized around the idea that this Tiffany is not your mother's Tiffany. And the backlash against this campaign has been pretty swift and negative. Um, Everything from it's kind of like a stolen tagline from Oldsmobile. This is not your father's Oldsmobile, which some people believe helped hasten the death of that brand. To it's insulting to current Tiffany customers, and that they're degrading current customers. What's your take on what you've seen so far of this work from Tiffany?
The first time I saw it, I did I, no pun intended, but I was clutching my pearls. It was just too much for me because as a creative, as a former creative, it violated one of the rules that all creatives work hard never to violate. And whether marketing officers care is another point, but we don't want to borrow or steal from something that's been done before. This is a direct ripoff of, and whether the campaign for Oldsmobile was bad, and we all agree that it was, or whether the campaign might have been good, the point is it's plagiarism. And creatives never want to commit plagiarism when it comes to stealing an idea. We want to be original. Now the idea, the emphasis on originality, I think, is misplaced. We don't need to be original. We need to be unique and distinctive, I think, is the term that we've used before. So that's the first thing that really struck me. It just made me shiver with anger. The second thing that I had a problem with was the fact that whether this, and we didn't discover this until we started drilling down and reading some of the copy on the website, this is not a rebranding effort. This is not to say Tiffany is now taking this idea, not your mother's Tiffany, and plastering that over everything they do. This is a new line of jewelry. So I fault Tiffany for sort of a misdirect and not being clear about what it is that they're doing. And I can understand why so many people were clutching their pearls in disbelief. This is for something called, and help me out here, I think I'm going to get it wrong. Is it called Tiffany City Hardware? Spelled H-A-R-D capital W-E-A-R, which we'll see in some, yeah. So this is a new line of jewelry which skews much younger. It's more urban. It's got an edge to it. This is not something that grandpa would buy for grandma for Christmas, clearly. But that was not reflected or was anyway clear in this launch of the advertising. So those are the two things that I would fault Tiffany for doing poorly.
So to me, it's interesting because Tiffany was acquired in January by Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, right? LVMH. And I know because I'm a follower of Mark Ritson and I'm an alumnus of his mini MBA in marketing and his mini MBA in brand management, and Professor Mark Ritson, who's not only an academic, but also a working brand consultant who's done a lot of work in the luxury space and a lot of work for Louis Vuitton and LVMH. These are some of the most sophisticated marketers in the world. They play in the luxury sphere where it's all about brand. We talk about, some of these car manufacturers losing their way because their core competency is in engineering and in sales and in manufacturing and not really marketing. That's not the case with LVMH. So I'm going to give them a benefit of the doubt that there's a method to the madness. I also agree. I think that as we dug into it, what we found was it looks like it's not a Tiffany brand campaign. it looks like it's a campaign for this new line within Tiffany that's intended to skew younger, more urban, etc. The fact that they didn't clarify that and that it's caused this big backlash, I think you go back to a little bit of the P.T. Barnum thing and say no publicity is bad publicity, and it kind of made people think, and maybe there's a cushion here for them to come out and say, hey, this wasn't about Tiffany. This was about this line of, and they could almost have a second round of publicity in the clarification. I don't know if that's the plan. I've seen that work with Burger King on certain occasions where they've had multiple rounds with the same idea in terms of going back and clarifying or trying to decontroversialize something that was controversial. They actually got a second round of publicity, which had the CMO smiling the whole time. So I think the jury's still out on this, not your mother's. I think most people aren't aware of the Oldsmobile. Only like old advertising farts like you and me would know it. And in a way, it might have been done tongue in cheek, right? Like it's not really that they're copying, but they're kind of parodying that idea in a way. Excuse me. So I think it remains to be seen.
Well, I would agree with you in that particular vein because my commentary was more on some very specific things about what creatives don't do. So, I am aware, and I credit you for helping me learn about this, of the stature of an LVMH in the marketing world. And so maybe you have a really good point. We'll have to wait and see about that.
I think we could come back and revisit in a few months and see what Tiffany is doing then. But I would say for a brand that you don't hear that much about and only being acquired in January, their first kind of campaign out the gate suddenly, it blew up, at least in LinkedIn and in marketing spheres. So again, I think some publicity is better than no publicity at this stage for Tiffany.
Well, maybe P.T. Barnum is smiling in his grave and Paul Feldwick is nodding in understanding.
Yes, sir.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.
Bye-bye.